All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another session, another live session on my Declassified Caribbean News Network channel. And we're looking today at the title Reparations in the Climate Era, Justice or a Power Play. And I want you to come this afternoon, just like any other afternoon, come with your intellect, move away your emotions, and begin to learn to think and to reason from cause to effect, right? Many of us are lacking that sort of skill, ability to reason from cause to effect. We must understand that, in fact, I do believe that people of African descent should receive some form of reparations. Other peoples have, including the enslavers. They received, right, compensation, reparations for the loss, the so-called loss of this business, of this trade. So we are going to be looking at the facts, and we are going to be discussing to see where we are going with this climate change agenda and reparations merged together. Now, for those of us who are people of African descent, the global elites are very good at merging two things together. First of all, when we're talking about now Black people and Black people's struggles, now they have merged it with, the LGBTQU movement, the LGBTQ, right, movement. They no longer want to separate African things and the injustices done to people of African descent. They always merge it so that we can always be undermined and we can be sidelined. Now we're hearing another thing that they're merging, reparations justice with climate justice. Now, for centuries, the Caribbean, Africa, and other parts of the global South have carried the consequences of systems that shaped the modern world, from colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade to resource extraction and unequal economic structures. Today, as the world faces the growing crisis of climate change, a new debate has emerged. Who should pay for the damage caused by a warming planet, and who should receive support to rebuild? Many developing nations argue that climate change is not simply an environmental crisis, it's also a question of historical responsibility. They point to the fact that many of the Caribbean countries and even African countries most vulnerable to rising seas, strong hurricanes, droughts, and food insecurity contributed the least to the industrial emissions that accelerated global warming. And that is true. For these nations, climate reparations represent a form of justice, compensation, financing, and technology transfers to help communities adapt and survive. However, critics argue that the language of reparations risks becoming a political tool rather than a practice or practical solution. They question who should be held responsible today for actions committed generations ago, how payments should be determined, and whether climate funds would truly reach the communities most in need. This debate raises deeper questions about history, economics, morality, and power. Is climate reparations a necessary step toward correcting global inequality, or is it a strategy being used by some governments to gain influence and financial leverage? This afternoon, we examine the controversial question, reparations in the climate era, justice or a power play, exploring the history behind the movement, the arguments for and against it, and it could and how probably and what it could mean for the future of the Caribbean and the developing world. We're going to begin by looking at something that they're telling us, that the climate change is caused really by slavery, right? Slavery is what is actually the cause of the climate change, they are telling us. And we're going to share that article here. And that's something that is interesting because every day they come up with a new cause of climate change. And now they're telling us that slavery is. And that is why it's important that we deal with the climate crisis. So this is what coming from the National African American Reparations and Commission, that's what they call the NARC. And the title here, it says, Slavery Fueled Our Climate Crisis. Here's how reparations can slow it down. So It's different now. It's now slavery that is causing. It's not fossil fuels anymore. It's actually slavery. Addressing all the damage is addressing all the damage. You're saying is going to take more than money. It's going to take new laws and a deeper understanding of how our climate crisis came to fruition. And he says here, growing up, I heard the phrase 40 acres and a mule from all the adults in my life, usually in the context of an unkept promise. We're still waiting for our 40 acres, the writer here is saying. It took some time before I fully understood that there's a nuanced relationship between climate change, colonialism, enslavement, and reparations that affects all of us profoundly today. When we discuss the reasons for accelerating global warming, our conversations often focus on the corporate waste, littering waterways or emissions pumped into the ozone from factories. And he's suggesting here, while these present day practices contribute substantially to rising temperatures and more destructive and more frequent natural disasters, colonialism and chattel slavery also play a huge part. And even beginning to address this damage is going to take more than money. It's going to take new laws and a deeper understanding of how all this damage came to fruition. Now, that's something that caught my attention yesterday while I was doing my research for this topic. And I'm realizing that climate now is the climate that we're talking about is caused by slavery and colonialism. So it's no longer fossil fuels. Do you see how our politicians use a lot of things to brainwash the world? And as I said that, I want to look at this very truthful statement here that is coming from, a very brief TikTok video I'd watched and see. And it has a lot of truth that I think all of us should be privy to, right? So let me show you that quickly. And then we are going to look into other aspects of our climate change and slavery and colonialism. They're pushing an agenda that I am telling you is not going to be about slavery. It's going to be about the total control of our world. So we're seeing here politicians don't work for you, but many of us do think that they are still working. You're going to see very soon.
Every photo op is just another ad campaign. You're not a citizen in their eyes, you're a customer they need to keep paying. Before you start defending your favorite politician, like this video and subscribe, because this one pulls back the curtain on how the game really works. Think about it. Every campaign is marketing. Every slogan is a sales pitch. They don't care about your life. They care about your loyalty. They sell you hope during election season, fear during crisis, and outrage when donations slow down. They sell you safety so you'll accept control. They sell you enemies so you'll ignore accountability. They sell you a dream of change while cashing checks from the same people funding both sides. When was the last time a politician actually sacrificed something for you? They talk about serving the people while living like royalty. They trade your future for stock options and speaking fees. They tell you they understand your struggles from behind gated communities. And the crazy part is, we buy it every time. Because we've been trained to treat politics like a brand. Democrats sell compassion. Republicans sell strength. Both sell fear. And when the cameras turn off, they're all at the same dinners, laughing about how well the product moves. You. That's the product. Your vote, your outrage, your attention. It's all part of the deal. So tell me in the comments, do you still believe politicians serve the people? Or do you see now that they've just been selling you this whole time?
Okay, good. So we see that our politicians are not working in our best interest, right? They give us great sounding words and we hear very positive rhetoric, what we want to essentially hear so that we can vote for them, and we vote them in, vote them out, and that is a cycle of what happens in our world. And do we blame them if they're people, if the constituents are stupid, right? Would you blame them for that if we have been a dumbed down public? Absolutely not. We are really the problem. They're not the problem. If we were thinking people, they would not be able to do that. But they just see us as objects, as products. And that is what the slave masters saw the Africans as, right? Chattel people, people without souls, people who can't think. Now, is it that we are so-called more educated, have access to more information, yet we have been a dumbed-down population and not much different from the slaves that existed before? And that's exactly why they are actually doing it. Now let's look at some other things. Climate representative, we're looking at the climate change for those of you who are joining, reparations in the climate era, justice or power play. And we're here to show that the climate agenda is just a religious agenda. It's a religious political agenda that is going to seek for the total, dictatorial running of the world. It's not about, freeing people. It's not about, providing reparations, right, and helping us to become economically actually empowered, right? That is not their agenda. Now, it says here the increasing frequency and severity of natural disasters in Africa has damaged economies and destroyed critical infrastructure such as roads and housing. This has left countries with less revenue and more expenses to cover. So everything now is being told in the light of climate change, that or debt or indebtedness is linked to climate change, really. It's not linked to the monetary systems, the neoliberal system that they have imposed upon the world. It just has to do with the climate. With minimal resources, the affected countries resort to increased borrowing, high interest rates on emergency loans, limited foreign exchange, and the diversion of funds from essential services to debt repayment trap vulnerable nations in a cycle of debt and climate vulnerability, says Magali Masamba, a lecturer at the University of Pretoria. Now, today, more than 20 low-income countries in Africa are in or at high risk of debt distress, data from the One campaign shows. When countries allocate more funds to debt repayment than to health or climate resilience, the system is not only broken, it is unjust, adds Masamba. So we can see here, guys, that they're telling us that the climate change is the only reason for which we have the economic inequalities that we suffer in the world. Is that true? Is that true? Or is it their way of telling us that they want all countries to come on board with their climate agenda that will wound up enslaving the entire world's population? Yes, that is their agenda. And they understand that if they just use it and they put it under the umbrella of African liberation, of African reparation, then people are going to accept it and that they are going to be deceived. That is what they're doing, and many people are still actually deceived, not willing to listen, not willing to do their own research because we are intellectually lazy. Now, let's look at another video in terms of where they are going with the climate change. What is their ultimate agenda with the climate change agenda? Now, we have a former activist, a former climate change activist, sort of telling us what they're doing, and saying essentially it's a scam.
Activist, I now think the climate movement is a scam. So in my experience of going to events with big nonprofits that are big environmental organizations or spending time with activists, there's a huge focus on superficial things that are not actually going to make a dent in protecting the environment, but become sort of like sacred. So for example, like having compostable plastic, like that becomes like you must have compostable plastic at events, even though I've gone to events with huge nonprofits environmental nonprofits where they have things like compostable plastic and there is no composting, and at the end of the event it literally just goes in the trash. So I saw things like that a lot, and it really confirms for me that this movement is more based on outwardly portraying itself as, oh, I'm environmentally friendly, I'm trying to do best for the climate, when the decisions that they make don't actually move the needle either way.
Yeah, and when we're talking about climate and we're talking about economic injustices, shouldn't we be talking about the IMF, the role of the IMF, the World Bank, and how these institutions, these multilateral institutions, have devoured the economic resources of all our countries, particularly in the Caribbean and here and there in Africa? Yes, but who is doing that? No one is willing to do that. So wow, where did the IMF come from? And this gentleman here is going to tell us that the IMF and the World Bank and these institutions
part
are
of a
colonial
global
institutions.
economic
They're
architecture that was designed during colonial times. The United Nations itself was designed during colonial times, right? For a long time, the UN had less than 50 member states because the rest of the world was colonized. So it was the colonizers who established the UN, it's the colonizers who established the World Bank, the IMF, and who dominated the creation of the rest of the economic architecture. So an economic architecture that was not designed by us, that was not designed for us, why do we expect it to deliver justice for us today? And I'll give you another kind of point that people should reflect on. The fact that so many of our countries, Kenya included, have been essentially following to the T economic policy instructions dictated by the World Bank and IMF in particular for decades. The fact that we are still in a debt trap today, deeper in debt traps today, means one of two things. Either that these institutions are actually incompetent and we shouldn't listen to them, or they're actually doing this as part of their intentional economic entrapment. It's got to be one or the other. Either way, from our perspective, their model should be rejected. Their model of development, their instructions and prescriptions and conditionalities are designed to produce entrapment. So that's something that all of us should reflect on.
Right. So notice that Ms. Mia Motley and all of these climate change activists are not telling us about the IMF and the World Bank. In fact, they are in the pockets of the World Bank and the IMF, aren't they? The same thing with the United Nations. The United Nations was founded during the history of colonialism. So the United Nations came out of colonialism, right? But yet still we're suggesting that these organizations are organizations that are trying to liberate us and that we should not have a discourse about them and how they are in fact inflicting slavery upon the region and African peoples and the global South in general. This is not the conversation. The conversation is just this raw climate change agenda, and we have to have faith in that the climate is going to be something that, if we don't deal with it, is going to create a lot of havoc for human population. But isn't debt going to create a lot of havoc? Isn't it already enslaving lots of countries in the world because of the strictures and the rigidity of the IMF and the World Bank? Yes. In fact, Ms. Mia Motley is on the committee. She is a high-level member of the International Monetary Fund. Is she presenting to us and the world that while she's talking about climate change and slave reparations, that we also need reparations from the IMF and the World Bank, who have really stolen lots of funds through interest rates and stolen our resources? Stolen our resources. In Jamaica, for example, there is a national housing trust that was built during the 1970s under Michael Manley, and it was designed for people who were unable to get houses, right? And that they could get it at a cheaper price. The IMF, on many occasions, went into the kitty of those funds and stole billions of Jamaican dollars so that it could pay them. And they're telling us about climate change. Now, shouldn't that money have been used to have built houses for poor Jamaicans who during last year, Hurricane Melissa, was not able to be sheltered properly because they were not able to be housed in strong houses that would have, in some cases, mitigated the destruction of the hurricane? Now, we're not being told anything about that. All we're being told is that we must believe in their religious science of climate change, right? That is what you must have faith, because that is what they say, and you must, digest that sort of nonsense. Now, look at this where we say, was slavery built on just race? Somebody's asking this question. Was slavery built on just race? And I thought that's something we want to listen to.
Put Africans at the bottom, saying that they had no souls. The Enlightenment imposed the concept of race on a practice that had been going on for centuries in order to justify that practice. And why did they have to justify it? And this is the point. Because people in the West began to question slavery's moral validity. The fact is that people of all colors owned slaves, both as part of the Atlantic slave trade and outside of it. In the United States and Caribbean, black people owned thousands of black slaves, and so did the Native Americans. Nearly 20,000 of the Native American 5 civilized tribes sided with the Confederacy during the Civil War, fighting to keep slavery alive. 28% of the black population who were free in New Orleans pledged their support to the Confederacy. All of the 13 southern states of the Confederacy had substantial numbers of black slave owners. there were more than 250,000 free blacks, and nearly 4,000 of them were slave masters who owned more than 20,000 slaves. The practice of slavery was legal, after all. We need to remember that governments did not own slaves. Slave owners did. In fact, the US government fought a war to end slavery. How much should the descendants of the 400,000 Union soldiers who lost their lives fighting to free the slaves pay to the descendants of the slaves they freed? It's bizarre to suggest that human beings should inherit the outrage of the deeds of their parents. Should the child of a mass murderer be sent to prison because of his father's crime? No. In America, in the main, it was the Democrats who owned slaves, and the Democrats who in the main passed and enforced Jim Crow laws. It was also the Democrats who founded the Ku Klux Klan. Should the current Democratic Party be held responsible for this? No. We do not inherit the sins of our fathers.
Interesting. And she's making some interesting points here, because in the first place, I think that we think of slavery as something European, it was a new thing in the world, right? We must understand that slavery had always existed before European form of slavery. Now, European slavery, as we suggested, is one of the most despicable, if not the most despicable, because it treated us as chattel. Not to suggest, however, that other systems of slavery did not treat people as chattel also. Because when you read, for example, the history of the Jews in Egypt, they were treated as chattel to some extent. Even though they were not seen, or it wasn't said that they were chattel, but their very hostile treatment, the system under which they had to function, was extremely severe. However, what she suggested is that during the Enlightenment, and people's reading of the Bible and the whole matter of morality came up, people started to question slavery in all societies. Why do you think slavery was banned in the entire West, even though they're doing it in other ways? But why do you think that the trafficking of slaves was essentially banned by law in the West? Because people actually had come of age to question the moral fiber of slavery, which was not questioned before in the world. Never questioned before in the world. It took the Enlightenment for people now to begin to understand, as they read for themselves and they understood morality to a greater degree, that they say, but something is not right here. The system of slavery should be illegal. But in many other countries and cultures, it was legal. It was legal. And I think what is happening right now is that they are moving us away slowly but surely from the whole argument of morality of slavery to just economics. And when they move us and just talk about economics versus morality, then that system can also be reinstituted, re-implemented, which I think that they are about to do. But they have to remove from everything, from our minds, any form of morality and say that they are the masters and we should listen to them. And the climate change agenda is one such, which it is hidden. It's a hidden agenda in which they're suggesting that they're wonderful people who want to actually, create justice, give back justice to whom justice has been denied. All right, so that's what we have to understand. Now, there is an article here that suggests that the global reparations movement, the greatest political tide of the 21st century. The global reparations movement, the greatest political tide of the 21st century. And it says the CARICOM Reparations Commission, that's the CRC, welcomes recent developments in the movement for reparatory justice, especially in the Caribbean and across the United States, and the wide media coverage of the movement in the aftermath of globalization of the Black Lives Matter campaign. Now, let me ask you something. Do you think if the climate change agenda was not in harmony, was not in sync with the media agenda, the mainstream's media agenda, that they would be covering it? No, they would not. Why do you think they're covering it? Because it is in sync with the agenda of the global elites. They understand that. There's no way that the US media and the British media and Western media in particular, including the United Nations, was going to air this and pretend as if they want to really give reparatory justice to African Americans and to Black people in general. They're only doing it because they know that Black people are emotional. We don't read. We don't reason well. And you might be upset, but that is the truth. That is the truth. So they can use other things. And they understand also that slavery is still present in our imagination because it's something that was far gone, right? So they're using now the rhetoric to deceive us, to suggest that they really want to repair the damage that was done through slavery. But when we look at what is happening economically and politically, we see that we are being re-enslaved. We saw what happened in Venezuela. We see what is happening now in Iran. We see what is happening in Burkina Faso. And all of these countries where the United States is seeking, and the West in general, are seeking to what? To re-enslave people, not allowing them to build their countries in the way that would help their people to grow and to be prosperous. So this is nothing that should alarm us and make us believe that these people are genuine, because they are not. They are not genuine. This is a religious agenda that is on the tables. Now let's look at something else, and let us go on quickly before we end the live. We are going to look at other materials and look at what is happening. This person is saying here, slavery has not died. Slavery has not died. Let's look at what she's saying. Because sometimes we think slavery is dead.
Left us. It just evolved. Capitalism is now what it's called, got my people brainwashed. I'm talking living and dying by these jobs. Plantations turned corporations. Cotton fields turned into warehouses or office spaces. They selling dreams of financial freedom with the price of your time. Like, I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson, but my baby is turning 5. And I know you said during peak season there's no days off, but how do you expect me to tell my child the jobs don't care about memories? That they'll work you until you're just a memory and post your position opening before your obituary? Tell me what's freedom when rent got you rationing on the first. When your labor makes billions for your company, but your check don't even cover your hearse. Tell me what's freedom when you can't even afford to walk out that door. Can't afford to quit because debt will come for you just as quick as that whip and massa. Don't care if you got your master's. The only thing you're mastering is the art of the employee. Trained to put the plantation's needs before me. Certified to people please to save my humanity. Trading passions for paychecks, dreams for nightmares, freedom for fake security. Yeah, we all a big happy family until that budget gets tight. So Congress can't make a decision. Now you gotta lean on your community just to feed your kids at night. How I give you 20 years of my life? Miss birthdays, suffer back pains and sleepless nights just to get replaced by someone you paying half the price. Tell me I'm not in chains when every time I hear that alarm clock ring, I can feel the dopamine leave my brain. Tell me I have control when my freedom lies on the accrual rate of my PTO. 12 years of school being told to dream big just as long as it's not bigger than my cubicle.
So are we free? Are we really free? And they're suggesting that, yes, we are free, and that they're giving us reparations so that we can build on this freedom that they think that they have given to us. But are we really free? Now, when we look also in Africa, in the Congos, for example, and this person is going to reveal to us what is happening there, is the African continent free? Is the African continent free? And this is what we need to ask ourselves. And are they practicing slavery anew? And we are here.
United Nations recently recognized transatlantic slavery as the gravest crime against humanity and has called for reparatory justice discussions. That means this is no longer an American conversation. It's a global conversation, and we need to be part of it. Before we talk about reparations, we need to talk about something else: mindset. Because many Black Americans don't believe reparations will ever happen. Some believe we don't deserve them. Some believe they were already paid. Some believe asking is pointless. But let's talk about that. If your mind is convinced something is impossible, your brain stops looking for pathways to make it possible. Neuroscience tells us what people believe influences what they pay attention to. What they pay attention to influences what they act on. And what they act on influences outcomes. That's why mindset matters, because a house divided cannot stand. If we can't agree on what justice looks like, how can we organize around achieving it? So I want to ask you a direct question, Black America. If reparations were on the table tomorrow, what would they look like to you? Would it be a direct compensation, land ownership, business investment, educational opportunities, institution building, or something else? Drop your reparations wish list in the comments. In the next video, we're going to look at documented examples of reparative policies and compensation that other groups have received throughout history.
Now, we can see that this young lady is actually very excited about what she's hearing, right? Not understanding the deceitful language that is being played at the United Nations and these multilateral agencies of slave reparations, because we know that it is not about slave reparations. We know that it's a way to get monies from the poorer countries into the coffers of the wealthiest countries under the very deceitful agenda of climate change. Right? That is what the agenda is. Now, why aren't we hearing about the Rothschilds and what they're doing? Why aren't we hearing about the Bill Gates and what they're doing and how they are actually re-enslaving the global population? We're not hearing that, when they talk about, slave reparations. Why don't they tell us, for example, how Britain was actually compensated for slavery until 2025. The planters were actually compensated, and they were actually, that monies paid out to them, that reparations paid out to them was actually finished in 2015. And I'm going to give you that and show you what this is happening here with the modern day slavery. Let's go to modern day slavery first, and then we move on to the video of the fact that Great Britain actually paid their enslavers until 2015.
We are being completely greenwashed by companies like Tesla and others that boast that they're completely eco-friendly. But where are they getting all the cobalt from that they need for their rechargeable lithium batteries? Africa. More specifically, the Republic of the Congo, which they have completely devastated. All in the name of cheap labor, so they can greenwash us and tell us that it's all eco-friendly. Watch this video real quick and we'll come back.
No fish here.
No fish here?
No fish. There is nothing here.
Why?
Because the river has been polluted and all fish has died. You see? Donc avec l'acide, je vous dis que l'acide sulfurique ne laisse rien dans la rivière. Il n'y a même pas de crapauds. There is nothing inside. No life in the river.
So there's a modern day slavery going on in the Congo. And if you want to read all about it, you can do so in a book called Cobalt Red. But it basically describes the villages that have been completely bulldozed in order to open up opportunities for more cobalt mines. And they call these miners artisanal miners, not slave wagers that are mothers with babies strapped to their back, making 50 cents a day, sometimes a couple bucks. Now in the book, Kara, the author, says that people are working in subhuman conditions in a way that you would imagine people working centuries ago with pickaxes and shovels and things like that. Look at this. Would you do this for $1 a day? Millions of trees have been cut down. The water is full of contaminants. And as you heard from the video, they can't even fish. The water is so toxic there that there are no fish living, which brings to mind, how are you going to water your crops and drink and so forth? Now, cobalt is toxic to touch, toxic to breathe, yet all of these thousands of poor Congolese people are doing it every day. Hundreds of thousands of these villagers have been displaced because of the mines there. Their villages just bulldozed over. They have no other options. And now imagine that entire population of people that cannot survive without scrounging in these deplorable mines. So this author went out of their way to interview family members of these mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, children, little kids that go to these mines every day. And what they found out was horrifying. Tens of thousands of tunnels dug out. None of them have supports or ventilation shafts or anything that they should. And they collapse on people all the time, burying them alive, even kids. But these stories never leave the Congo. Instead, when you Google, for example, Tesla mining in Africa, you're going to find the most greenwashed bullshit on the internet. Tons of websites made about how amazing it is, how eco-friendly, how they're helping out people in Africa. Look it up for yourself. You tell me if you believe it.
All right, so that's a very intelligent sort of, analysis. Now, one of the things that the global elites have done to all of us is that they have allowed us to see this, look at the superficial. So you look at this, white-looking lady and think that, oh, she's white, so I don't need to listen to what she has to say. But let me just say something to you. How many Black people are reasoning from that perspective? Right, that the fact that we do still have slavery in Africa, on the African continent, many of our people are not talking about that, but we're talking about reparations for something that was done, years ago, which they should, I'm telling you, get some reparations for, because Great Britain did and United States slave masters did. But the way in which it's done and the way how is being reasoned out is not the way how it's going to be done. Now we have J. Edgar Vacuum Cleaner saying here, I made a video titled Why Slavery, Colonialism, Reparations is the Dumbest Debate Ever. And maybe we should go and watch that video and talk to you, Mr. Edgar, if you want to come on this program and air your views on that. We would be willing to have you here. Right? So you could get in touch with me and we could invite you to be one of our guests. But that is true. It is a dumb debate. It's not dumb in the sense, okay, let me just be clear here. It's not dumb in the sense that it should not be a debate that should be had. It should be had. But the way in which we are dealing with it, we are discussing it, is one which is delusional. We can see where most of us are moving into the direction of the tech tyranny, tech slavery, right? Yet still we are looking back centuries. They're telling us to go back to history, when at present we are seeing modern day version of slavery, and we're not talking about that. So how can we free ourselves and get reparations of something done to us or done to our ancestors years or decades ago? And right now we are suffering from that system that continues to oppress us, with the same people, the descendants of the same slave masters, the Rothschilds, and all of these people that own the world, the multinational corporations, right? The IMF, the World Bank. Are we getting reparations from them? Are we getting reparations from these corporations that have gone to Jamaica, have gone to Grenada, have gone around the Caribbean, around Africa, and have pillaged and plundered? Now, these are the same corporate people, who are telling us that we have to get reparations. Now, are you stupid? And the same thing happened during the pandemic. The same people who created the pandemic were the same ones who came up with the solution for the pandemic, and we accepted it. It's almost like saying somebody who set your house on fire, the arsonist, is supposed to be the one that extinguishes that fire. And it's not going to happen, particularly if the arsonist did it deliberately, the person who caught your house on fire. And that is what we are waiting for. The same people who are trying to enslave us now are the same ones who are pushing this climate agenda and the reparatory justice. And they have merged them into one, which means, therefore, that they want the climate justice to be the predominant agenda, while they are going to negate and to brush aside slave reparation, the reparatory justice. But people still continue to worship at the altar of climate change. Continue to worship there because they're going to enslave you and your children. Because, bless up everyone. Welcome to the live, David Freighter. That was welcome to, and make sure you're liking the live and sharing it. Let's see what this person is saying. Ibrahim is saying, or Ibrahim, I'm Ibrahim fan, although you made good points yesterday that we should use our brains and question his motives behind the scenes, especially, but I separate him from Mia because he is taking back, I guess Africa, I would mean. And that's how I see it. He's taking back the resources. That's their reparations, and other leaders should follow at least that framework. Well, for what we can see, Ibrahim, it appears that that's what he's doing. What we're saying is that the fact that he's dealing with Russia and China, we ought to be very skeptical about what he's doing, right? But at the moment, That is what we can see, but it doesn't mean, therefore, that is going to be the ultimate goal. Because one of the things with our politicians is that sometimes we see them doing great things and it looks like they're doing wonderful things and we commend them, but a lot of times it does not end up well. So we hope and we pray that he is genuine, he's sincere. But what I'm saying to Ibrahim, he's one man. And for us to believe that one man can stand up against a global system, all right, a global system that seeks to enslave the entire world, the entire planet, is delusional thinking. But we definitely support him, and we support his efforts and, you know, his good intentions, right? But we understand the expression that the road to hell is filled with a lot of people of good intentions, or with good intentions. So we hope that we don't wind up in hell, all right? And that's what I'm saying. But I'm not here saying, Ibrahim, that I don't like Mr. Traore or I find him to be this or that. What I'm suggesting is that if we're going to think, which we need to think, we must always be skeptical. And I'm saying healthy dose of skepticism, not to go around and call your politicians names, right? And make accusations. What I'm saying here is that we have to be skeptical because we do not know where this is going to end up. We've lived this history before, and we've seen where great men, they've tried, but sometimes the system ends up, you know, either suffocating them or making the system in which we have to live worse. And by the way, we are the ones, the citizens, who have to live with the consequences of their actions, of their policies, whether we like it or not. Okay, we've got to live, and your children and your grandchildren will have to live forever with these policies. Many times the consequences, these leaders don't have to suffer them, right? They can go abroad, they can send their children wherever, and you and your children are going to be the ones who will have to deal with the consequences of those, you know, of those policies, whether they were good or not. But what, you know, I mean, I leave you to decide, but that's my humble opinion, right? Based on the life that I've lived and the history that I have read. Yeah, last time I forgot to mention, you can find most of their doings on official government pages, Burkina 24. Yes. And then thank you for reminding me about that. Yes. And I'm not saying, I've read that he's doing some great work, you know, that Ibrahim Traore is doing some positive work in Africa. But at the same time, we still do not know who controls him, right? And what the powers that be that control him. And if they're controlling him, can they be using him as a means of deceiving us to trade one form of dictatorship for another? Now, a lot of times dictatorship often comes clothed in this garb of democracy, of this garb of benevolence and being philanthropic. So we have to be very careful when we see our politicians in that sort, treading that path. But I commend him. I commend him for his bravery. I commend him for his vision. I commend him for his courage, because many of our politicians need courage at the moment. What I don't like about what I see with Ibrahim Traore, I must say, is the fact that we have made him into this sort of cult of personality, where we have, you know, lots of what is online right now are AI generated, and that is not going to help us to understand this man. And that's what we have to understand too. The world in which we live is not the world of the 70s, the 80s, or the 90s, or even the early 200s. We're living now in an era of deception where AI is controlling and reshaping shaping the reality. So much of what we see or hear is not necessarily the reality. You know, I have been in situations in which, if you go to Latin America, for example, Latin America is a different place to live. They will tell you things and you think it's true because you're seeing it. And after they've gone, you realize that it was false, even though what you saw was what they told you. So there are people in this world, if you're not careful about deception, they can be showing you something and what you saw is blue, the color blue, but it ends up being a color purple, and you're saying, how was I deceived? And, you know, when I was looking at it, it looked blue, right? Why is it now purple? So this is what I'm saying to you. That is how our world now, and our world is too interlocked, interconnected, and our global elites work together, and they use people who are eloquent and who they know will command our attention. And then they allow them to do nice things, lovely things, and then they trade that for tyranny. Well, Ibrahim is saying, before you mentioned it, I've had to zoom out more than once and ask myself, I'm falling for a cult leader. Yes, we have to, all of us, it's not only you, Ibrahim, it's me, it's all of us have to always ask ourselves. We can only watch what they do and we can commend them for what they're doing now, but let's warn our people, don't believe everything you see, because a lot of things right now can be AI generated and it looks like the reality, but it's not the reality. So let's watch him, give him some time, maybe 5 years from now, what will we be saying about him? Like in the same way with Obama, 5 years after Obama was in office, many people, or even 4 years or less than 4, fewer than 4 years, people had now begun to recognize that Obama wasn't the person that he made himself out to be when he was on the campaign. So I'm just suggesting here, but he's a wonderful guy up to now, and let's not try to say otherwise. Now let us look at Hilary Beckles. Were African slaves? Well, were Africans, what you call now the elites there, the merchants? Were African merchants responsible for slavery? Let's look at what that is about. And here the Beckles is sort of debunking that history that he's suggesting here, that Africans and the merchants there were not necessarily responsible for slavery, and that is what you call propaganda, according to him. So let's listen to Sir Hilary Beckles of the University of the West Indies, Barbadian, who is speaking on that. Let me see, is it on the screen yet? Why is it not going on the screen? All right, let me add to the stage. Okay, right. Let me turn the volume up now, and we are going to see that this is what it is. Okay, go, Mr. Beckles.
Finds the myth that the Europeans have imposed upon us. To defend themselves in an age of moral outrage, the slave owners said, don't blame us. We tell the chiefs, we want 200 of your people, and the chiefs sell them to us and we take them, so don't blame us, we haven't committed any crime. They were saying that the Africans were their business partners. Now, the archives tell us something else. The documents in the archives speak about an age of terror, in which Europeans, highly armed with the latest military technology, the guns and the cannons, a militarized culture, arriving in West Africa and unleashing terror across the West African space. And these are small African governments confronting the strongest military complex the world has ever seen. So they want you to imagine a gunman coming into your house and said, listen, we're going to rape your wife or we're going to rape your daughter. You choose. Are we going to rape one of them? It's your decision. If you don't choose, we will rape them both. And the history will say, well, you might just sell up your daughter. The history is written from the gunman's perspective. Now, write that story from the wife's perspective, from the daughter's perspective. Because what the story will show is that after the man made a decision, he went mad. He now is psychologically destroyed. The wife is destroyed. The daughter will never survive it. And here is a family that is now broken, shattered, psychologically unfit to live. Write that history. The archives are filled with the information to rewrite that story. And that's not what we're now doing. We are now rewriting 300 years of Eurocentric interpretation of what happened in West Africa. What happened? What really happened? There are always corrupt people in every sphere.
Okay, so we can see here that one of the things that people always ask the question, how is it that African peoples actually sold their own people into slavery? But if we who are living right now realize how our politicians and our academics behave, we can see why they did it, because they are doing it right now, right before our eyes. We can see the Mia Mottley's, a politician. We can see people like the likes of Sir Hilary Beckles, and a brilliant mind, I should say, a great historian, but one who is not telling us the full truth. Because what he wants you to do is to accept this agenda that he knows is not going to help people. I think Hilary Beckles knows that. That it's not this sort of reparatory justice that they're talking about is not to give African peoples or descendants and their descendants any money at all. He knows that. In fact, the entire globe is now trying to what? To take away everything from all peoples and to re-enslave the global humanity. It's not just about African slaves. If they were living in a different era, if we were in a different era, and they were not doing what they're doing now, maybe we could trust them. But we cannot look at what they've been doing for the past century or the past decade and think that they are for real, because they're not real. And Red is saying here, some Africans were complicit with the slave trade. African kings and merchants got rich off of selling other Africans, and it is true. Just like our politicians today and our academics like the Sir Hilary Beckles. I don't want to say Sir Hilary Beckles because, somebody told me years ago, and somebody who works at the University of the West Indies, right there in Mona campus in Kingston, told me that Dr. Hilary Beckles, when he went from Barbados and got that position in Kingston, that they had just renovated the home that he was about to live in right there at the university campus, and that he was not particularly happy with that renovation. He wanted a renovation that made him look like a king, and that should look like a palace. Now he went to a country that he knew even at that time was under strict IMF sort of, rigidity, right? And austerity. And Dr. Hilary Beckles wanted Jamaica at the time to make a palace for him, to renovate the residence that had just been previously, renovated into something that looked like a king was living in that residence. So you can't really trust these people. And it's coming from a credible source. Someone who had to deal with him directly and to give and to disburse that sums of money to him. Heard some other stories about him. So these people are very interesting. Whilst they are pretending as if they care for people of African descent, they're not. They're just wearing their dashikis, right? And they talk this wonderful rhetoric. People believe them because they have no ability to think and to reason from cause to effect. And another thing we have to understand, ladies and gentlemen, knowledge is not just gleaned through just what you read and what you see. Intuition, discernment, that is a part, what we call the sixth sense. So having compiled all the knowledge that you can compile, you must be able to discern. You must be able to discern, and discernment comes through experience, through reading, through your knowledge, and through critical thinking. And many of us are not having that discernment. We can only see what we see, but we can't really connect the dots. And that is what we are here trying to do on this channel. Very difficult for you to understand the agenda, but I have to continue to do so. By the way, Marcus Garvey and all of these great people that you talk about, when they were alive, you weren't listening to them, were you? Right? They were not people you wanted to listen to, right? What Marcus Garvey was saying when he was alive was nonsense. But now it's being promoted all around the world, by black people, that what he was saying made a lot of sense. So what I'm doing now, many of you are not appreciating it, but very soon, maybe after my death, you'll understand that it is so, and it is everything I'm telling you is true. Now, Fazi Macabas is saying, what would ask Mr. Beckles, how did the Europeans know where to go and kidnap these slaves? Good question. Very good question. And let us say, Fazi, that the Africans did not really know when they went their first or second or third trip. But this thing lasted for centuries. Right? It lasted for centuries. So how is it that they did not really get that something is wrong here. I'm sure they also would have heard news coming from the far end of the other side of the Atlantic, that how the slaves were treated. It went back to them. But let us cut them some slack. Maybe for the first or 3 years or 4 years into that trade, that they perhaps were not so much aware of the agenda and what was happening, but eventually they heard and they did, and they actually participated, because it's money. And as I'm saying to you, don't look at people as white or black. You have to look at human nature, because whether they're white or black or purple, humans will kill and they will destroy. They will kill and destroy. And many of you have friends, and people have already always suggested that keep 1 or 2 good friends, because many of the people that are hanging around you are not your friends, right? And that's for black, white, or purple. Okay, you must understand that. They're just associates, colleagues with whom you laugh and you chat and you have a good time. Now, Thazi is saying, did the Europeans understand the terrain? They didn't. They didn't. And in some cases, as was he the one who said that in some cases, where was I reading something where some of the kingdoms were so vicious in terms of fighting against it, that it was, they didn't even think of going to that sort of kingdom, into those kingdoms. So the Africans did help. The Africans did help the Europeans, as they are doing now. The likes of Miss Mia Motley, the likes of Dr. Andrew Holness, all of them are in bed with these European slave masters, and they are enslaving the entire region and telling you that you are going to get reparations, which is delusional. It's delusional in light of what they're doing to your economy, in light of their being with the IMF and the World Bank and the WEF and the United Nations, which is also another colonial institution. But you're stupid. You love them still. You believe everything that they say because you are a person of faith, and you don't believe in God, you believe in man. And that's what we call about the humanistic education system, humanism, where humans are the ones who are now your gods, and they're going to take care of you. Good luck to you and that. Hope it works well. Now, we have Red is saying, Rose, some Africans fought against slavery. We hardly hear those stories. That is true too. That is true too. And I think I did actually, let me see if I could go back to another clipping that I saw where that was actually fortifying the point you're raising here. So it's not just black and white. It is more nuanced than, but what we do though in the current, discussion, we tend to just promote one version, one narrative over another. Let me see if I can get this here where somebody was raising the point that you raised, sir. I want to see if I had it here. Oh, let us look at this. Let us look at this. This is what I wanted to show you in terms of reparations. And
did you know that the single largest financial operation in the history of not Great Britain was to pay reparations to 45,000 slave owners? Not reparations to enslaved people, reparations to slave owners. Mm-hmm. The Brits have been paying this off until 2015. It was the equivalent of about 250 billion pounds. 15 of the 20 million pounds in that currency, that was the original payment, was raised for the government by Nathan Rothschild and Moses Montefiore, however you say that name, from UK and European creditors. The debt incurred was only finally settled in full in 2015 as part of government debt restructuring. Until then, regressive taxation ensured almost 2 centuries of subsidy from British wage earners and consumers of basic commodities to the elite holders of public debt, to the ex-slave owners themselves and their descendants.
Now, let us reason from cause to effect. They're telling us that they want to give us reparatory justice, right? But they're not talking about the participation of the Nathan Rothschilds and these other elite families in the slave trade. They're not exposing them, and that the same Rothschild was responsible for ensuring that these planters, former planters, got that amount of money from Great Britain. Now, let me ask you a question. Let us reason, because that is what we have to do, right? Don't we have Africans and their descendants who live in Great Britain? Don't we have Caribbean citizens and their descendants living in Great Britain? And where do you think that money came from to have paid them back and to have, done that reparatory justice back to our enslavers? From Black people. It came from Black people also. It came from Black people also. And it was that year that David Cameron went to Jamaica and told Jamaica to forget about slavery. Right? So these are the same people. And why is Miss Mia Motley not challenging these people? Why is she just looking at just white and Black? And oftentimes they're trying to get back at white people who did not participate in the slave trade, who were not the rulers. They benefited. The white people have benefited, their children have benefited, but they were not the real movers and shakers. They were not the planters. So we are not exposing the planters and their descendants. We are exposing ordinary white people who had nothing, even though they benefited, but they had nothing to do with the origins of slavery. Isn't that stupid? So you look at another white person who is your neighbor and you think she is the enemy or he is the enemy. And you're not talking about the planters and their descendants, the Rothschilds, and all of these powerful people, the Bill Gates and these people. We're not talking about them, are we? We're just talking about white supremacy. And every time we talk about white supremacy, nothing is mentioned about those who are in the system of power. We don't talk about systems of power. We ignore that, and then we fight amongst each other, saying that you are the enemy, and I'm Black, and you're white, and we begin to have these nonsensical discourse. But until we can identify the real enemy in the room, and that is the power elites and their descendants, then it's not a good debate that we're having. And Miss Mia Motley and Andrew Holness and the guy here, Sir Hilary Beckles, will not challenge them. He will not challenge them. They don't have the tenacity. They don't have the courage. They don't have the conviction to challenge them. They can only talk to you and appease you by saying racism has to go, and we must get reparatory justice. And then it's climate change. It's not that we are having problems with the IMF and the fact that the wealth is not distributed equally. They're not talking about that. And the fact that the World Bank and all these, the WEF, she's not talking about that. And that these organizations are, in fact, at the moment, working on re-enslaving not only African peoples, but people all over the world. You won't hear that. Right? But we just want to have this very limited, narrow conversation about what Black white people do to Black people. And that's a good conversation to have. But it must be properly contextualized. And that is what we don't do on our podcasts. People just want to get emotional and, oh, yes, I'm Black and I need to be getting some justice. Yeah, and I agree. We need to get reparations. Don't get me wrong. I will say again, we deserve it. We deserve it, and our ancestors worked for it. However, the conversation that we're having, the debates that we're having are not rooted in truth. They're rooted in half-truths and propaganda. And we must look at it. We must analyze it and say, no, we've got to elevate the conversation, which is not elevated. Fat money came from the taxpayers of some islands, right? Absolutely. It came from them. And we're not hearing that. But Miss Mia Motley is on board, and she's saying that reparatory justice for all, right? And she's not debating the fact that some of us, alive as we are now, we had to help in the payment of the reparations to those people. Why were we doing that when we are not in good shape economically, when we haven't benefited? Why? Because again, if you can fool black people all the time, just tell them that, oh, we're wonderful people, and and we should get reparations, and our egos are filled, and we feel good about ourselves, and that suffices, right? Because that's how black people are. Right. Now, we Haitians will never forget, absolutely, and the Haitians are the ones who always bring it to our attention. And we tend to, when we think about Haiti, we always think Haiti is just this, what you say now, this pariah in the Caribbean, right? This pariah in the Caribbean. At the same time, we also had to pay reparations. We asked, why did the French, ask them to pay for their liberation? We also had to do it, right? And that is what was reported 2015, that what we were paying back our former, what do you call it now, slave masters, right? We were paying them back until 2015. And the Caribbean is sitting down there talking about reparations. And the people that we paid back to in recent times, were their descendants. So we have to think, and we don't want to think in this region. I'm tired of hearing the intellectuals and the fact that they're not as intellectual as they think they are. Right? Or is it that they are intellectual, but they have an agenda, and just like the Africans, the former African peoples there, the traders, the merchants, they sold their own people into slavery. Our politicians and academics are doing the same thing, selling us right back into slavery, as if we're not yet. We're already enslaved, but it's going to be greater. I'm telling you, people, it's going to be worse than we can even imagine. Spain and France, right? And then we have the descendants of the planters is who seeking reparations. Correct. Could not have said it better. Is it that the descendants of the planters are seeking reparations, but they are actually hiding it under that rubric that they're trying to give us, descendants of slaves, reparations? This is a very critical point he's raising, because that's how the global elites behave. They can steal by actually deceiving and telling you that they want to help you when they don't want to help you. They're actually stealing from you. Very important point you're raising here. And then we have here, along with the sellers of the property. Correct. And we have, I believe, Johnny Cochran and Dick Gregory said we have to go after the bankers, absolutely, and the insurance companies. These Olive Garden families are still around. They just changed their names. And that's what I'm saying, Stephen. And they're right. I'm right. They are right that we can't go after, the politicians and some climate justice people. We have to go after the bankers, right? The people like the Rothschilds, who ensured that we paid back the former planters reparation. We paid them back for our own liberty. It's something that is incredibly interesting. We do deserve it, but we don't deserve it in the sense that, the way in which we are behaving, Pedro Jamont, we don't deserve it. But we do deserve it if our people were much more intelligent. If we understood and we could unmask what they were doing, then yes, we deserve it. But now, in which the way in which we're moving, I think it's good for us to suffer. It's good for us to suffer. We love slavery. Do you know that many of the slaves did not want to be free? Do you know that? I think we sometimes look at the few African people who, and there were some who stood up to the system, but do you know the majority of the slaves were happy? Well, they weren't happy with the suffering, but they had been conditioned. They had become conditioned to accepting their lot and think that black people are superior, white people are superior, and they were inferior. So when you had many slave revolts, many of the African slaves, the former slaves, would report on these, the ones who rebelled. And we are doing the same thing. We don't want to listen to people who, you're too rebellious. What you're saying doesn't make any sense. Why rebel against a system that you live in? right? Why not accept that it is and you can do nothing to change it, right? But we can't change it as we're suggesting here, only if we become more intelligent and more educated. Now, people are bright. They have an agenda, and that is to collect money, correct? The only sad thing is that we who are supposed to push back against these so-called bright people, as you're saying, Stephen Knight, we can't because we are the fools, right? And what the guy there, Sir Hilary Beckles, was doing was just simply playing to the gallery, right? He was just playing to the gallery to ensure that he's accepted as a scholar and that the people who are going to get the money are not going to be angry at him, right? That's what he was doing, playing to the gallery. And then we have slavery had nothing to do with color. It was economic. It was both, right? So we have to accept that it was both economic and it was also racial slavery. If it weren't, then they would also have. We know we had indentured slaves who were so-called whites when it started first, but eventually it morphed into a racialized. Remember too that we didn't have racial slavery before. Before, the world had what is known as economic slavery, right? And maybe ethnic slavery too, but we never had slavery based on color. But in the 17th century, that was what came about. Or before the 17th century, by the way, the 16th century. So it was both. And we must accept that life is not black and white. It can be both realities, and we must look at it from a nuanced perspective. So slavery was both economic and also color-based. Yeah, they were conditioned. They were broken with the help of that Bible. Don't forget that. Yes, they were conditioned. They accepted it. They just said, that is what we have to do. And that is what we are seeing right now with the climate change and the slave and the reparatory justice. We are for reparatory justice on this channel. We deserve some form of reparations, not with the way in which they are doing it, but if it were done properly in terms of the building of schools, the building of hospitals, the building of roads, and the building of industries, then that is what we need right now. Right? If you go to a typical hospital in Jamaica, you can't find basic equipment in Jamaica right now for hospitals. People are dying. This is because of the suffering and the fact that we've always got to pay back, the IMF and all of these multilateral institutions. And we have to do that at the expense of our people suffering. Can't build schools, can't build hospitals, can't build proper road networks and maintain them, right? Yet we're talking about reparatory justice while we're still enslaved. We're still enslaved. So I guess we have to look at the reparatory justice even after slavery. Because they have enslaved us even after slavery. So how much do, Miss Mia Markley, if you're listening to this program, how much do they owe us? Even post-emancipation, post-enslavement, how much do they owe us? Because we still, after slavery rather, colonialism was still slavery. But not in the shackle sense, but economically we were still enslaved. So how much do they owe us post, was it 1830? Thereabout that we had the Emancipation Proclamation. So we need to hear from these people like Sir Hilary Beckles. How much do these people owe us in terms of reparatory justice? Because they did a lot. I mean, in the 1970s at the CIA operation in Jamaica, also in Grenada and other parts of the world, in Guyana, tell us how much they owe us. Because that too is a system of slavery. Mr. Manley, Mr. Maurice Bishop, they weren't able to move their country in the direction that they wanted to move their country into, and to have their people at least, enjoy some of the resources of their respective countries. So it's not only slave. Notice that they want to put us back into the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, probably the 19th century, and they're not moving us beyond. We should just have our eyesights on those centuries, and then we should not think about enslavement after that, because we are not independent. We are not independent. We're still enslaved. And forgive me that Stephen is saying, but I think he's a waste of time, Mr. Beckles, if he's willing to compromise for his own enrichment. I have no use for him. Yeah, and somebody was telling me, I was telling you, Stephen, the other day that he's at the University of the West Indies. He went there, and his home had just been recently, to my understanding, from a credible source, had been recently renovated, and he wanted them to renovate it to have, like stone this and stone whatever, and living like a king in a poor country like Jamaica that is under a rigid, austere IMF program. And Dr. Hilary Beckles knows that, but he doesn't care. He doesn't care. So all these people talking about sacrifice and all of that stuff, and they're going from London to South Africa to the United States and talking to Harvard, university audiences, all of this is just what? Talk. Empty talk. Empty rhetoric, right? So we have Pedro saying schools, roads, hospitals were built already, but they're still not sufficient. How many, for example, students do you have in Barbados for one teacher to one teacher? Do you have 1 to 10, 1 to 12, which would be the acceptable thing? Now, many of our schools have 1 to like 40 something students, one teacher to 50 something students, because we need more schools, right? We need more school campuses. We do need that. Our hospitals, as you're saying many times, Pedro, that even in Barbados, sometimes you have to have long waits in the hospitals because we need more hospitals. We need more hospitals, doctors, nurses, whatever. We're in South Korea, India, Pakistan, etc., colonized. A change of mind is needed, but India is not any great country to look at. South Korea is almost a U.S. colony of it's a colony of United States, and Pakistan. I don't think these are countries that are standard. India is even though it's one of the largest economies in the world, it is very poor, right? And people who have, even from the Caribbean, who have grown up in some cases poverty, they know what poverty is. When they go to India, they talk about how poverty-stricken that country is. So don't be fooled because we hear that it's one of the largest economies in the world, and it's lots of tech people are there, that it means therefore that they're prosperous, because that is far from the truth, far from the reality. So they too have been pillaged and plundered by the British colonialism. Then we have Stephen Knight is saying, but they can build fancy resorts and hotels and want us to work in them for slave wages and tell us we came back absolutely on beaches, something ain't right. The same, because today when I was thinking about it too, I thought about slavery and tourism, and I'm saying here that it's the same thing. It's the same thing. And I saw a brother online saying, why aren't they paying hotel workers in these Caribbean countries in US dollars? They should be paid in US dollars, right? But they pay them in local currencies, like the Jamaican dollar, that doesn't have anything, doesn't mean anything, doesn't have any value, right? While they are slaving them, right? And yet still we talk about, justice, right? These are the form of reparatory justice that we need right now. To have our people earn livable wages, to move away from the strictures of the IMF and the World Bank, to not have the United States breathe down our necks when we want to work and to build lives for our own citizens. That is the reparatory justice that we need right now, not to get some money that we know we won't get and will land into the hands of the ruling elites, the ruling class. We must learn how to reason from cause to effect. And right now, in no way, shape, or form are they going to give us money. It's not going to happen. In fact, they want to take money from us. No matter how poor you are, they want more of your money. They want to see you on the roads, on the streets, impoverished. We need honest and not deceitful leaders. Right. Well, pray for that, because leaders and honesty cannot really function in the same sentence, right? There's going to be a grammatical error. When we talk about politicians and honesty, we might have to delete a word there because the sentence is not going to read fluently, because that does not exist, right? Politicians are by nature deceitful. Politicians are by nature deceitful. It's for people to understand that and to be able to push back. But our people they love deception because they love their politics and they love to be entertained by the deceitful politics. So that is why they get away and, scot-free. They're blaming colonization for being poor. You gone off the route. Yes, it can. Colonization did contribute to our poverty, but it's not the only contributing factor. That's what we should clarify, Pedro. So it did contribute to our inequities, but it's not the only contributing factor. After slavery and after emancipation, they also created new laws that further enslaved us. We've spoken about African Americans, and after the Civil War, and they were free to roam around. But afterwards, they had the vagrancy laws. Then they had the prison laws in America that have really re-enslaved Black people, particularly Black males. So the fact is that they sort of reframe it, they restructure it, but the system still is intact. Okay, the system is still intact. That's why we're seeing, African Americans, even though they are of the population, 15% of the U.S. population, but they are overrepresented in the prison population, right? Because they want to enslave them. If not possible, you're wasting energy. Energy on what? Was Marcus Garvey wasting energy? No, it's not energy wasted. You have to ensure that you educate your people. Even if it's one person to be educated, it's very, very important. India blaming colonization, I'm sure they do. It might not necessarily be in the way we are doing it, right? But I'm sure they understand too. They're not stupid. They're not stupid to know Mahatma Gandhi and all these people spoke out against it. So they understood what the British had done. Right. And there's a lady here on YouTube, I forgot her name. She talks about what they've done with seeds and other things. And she talks she's also, I think, on the committee for reparations. I can't remember her name, but she talks about the fact that, Britain and these Western countries, United States, go to India and how Bill Gates, she talks about against Bill Gates and how he's, collecting the seeds and he is, pushing farmers in India out of business. So Indians are talking about it too. So probably not because you're not, conversant with that discourse, it doesn't mean that they're not talking about it, right? They're talking about it as well. But here we are the ones Black people are the ones leading out more in the discussion, which is not bad, but the middle class is growing in Africa. Things are looking up. A good book on Africa's potential is Africa 2050. So you think the middle class is growing in Africa. So why is it that the middle class is actually reducing in the West and in other parts of the world? Well, not except for China. I think China's middle class is growing too, or I don't know. The fact is that what about the drugs and guns absolutely planted deliberately in our communities? All of these things help to keep us in this condition, right? And they're not talking about these things. So these are the reparatory justice that we want to have, right? We want the guns to stop flowing, the illegal trafficking of guns and drugs. We want us to be totally, what should I say now, dismantled, the whole IMF and the neoliberal system to be dismantled, okay? Because it's suffocating us. It's suffocating people in Barbados. It's suffocating people in Jamaica. It's suffocating people in Africa. The IMF and these neoliberal institutions. If we can begin there, let's ask them to start there and building some schools and hospitals and some good roads that we can travel on, right? If we can begin there, then perhaps I will try to see if I can stretch my imagination to believe them. Perhaps I can stretch my imagination a few, and then, they've built some good hospitals. We're seeing that the guns are no longer flowing into the Caribbean. We're seeing the trafficking of drugs. We're seeing where they're not breathing over government's neck because the government is actually working in the interest of the people. so that they can be uplifted and they can become prosperous. If they start there, maybe perhaps a critically minded person like myself will say, stretch your imagination a little. I won't believe them fully, but I can say that perhaps they are on the road to giving us reparatory justice. But until then, I think that this is just smokescreen, which it is. And it has to do only with climate change. It has nothing to do with slavery. And climate change, as many people have said before, on this platform and many other platforms have said, that it is going to be the greatest transfer of wealth from the rich, from the poor, rather, to the wealthiest classes of people. Okay? We've got to now wake up and see that this is what is happening. Okay? Now, let's look at this. I think this caught my attention when I was researching. I'm coming down to the end of it, but so.
And the reason why
let's look at
we
what he's
focus
saying
on
here.
abolition is because where the good white people turn up. If we focus instead on what happened during slavery, then we see the good white people, actually wicked white people, brutalizing black people. And that's why we don't want to talk about it, because we don't want to deal with the harm that was actually caused. Instead, we want to deal with the good side, the repair, where the abolitionists turn up. But there's another dimension to this as well. Abolition doesn't begin with Wilberforce. Abolition begins with the first enslaved Africans who resisted their captors. And that resistance takes place before they get on board slave ships and have the Middle Passage. It happens during plantation slavery. Look, in Jamaican history, the biggest rebellion took place in 1760. Enslaved Africans fighting for freedom are seen as the first abolitionists. So that's one of the reasons why it happens. We don't want to deal with the damage that took place. We don't necessarily want to give acknowledgement to the Africans who fought for their freedom. So it's problematic. And look, I'm not the first person to say this. You listen to reggae music over the last 50 years. It tells the history of the rebels, the black people who fought for their freedom. You listen to hip hop culture. They'll talk to you about Denmark Vesey. They'll talk to you about other African Americans who fought for their freedom, because they know that this history is underreported. Why? Because as I started saying at the beginning, history is political. It's about power. Who gets empowered by what we say, who gets disempowered by what we say, is always a part of how we do history.
Now, what he says makes a lot of sense, right? That sometimes we think that our freedoms came from the abolitionists. Now, not that they did not play a role. We don't want to hear say that the abolitionists did not play a role and the system, because we need them, right? Because they're the ones who make laws and all of that stuff. But we must not forget the agency of the slaves in freeing themselves, right? And if we are going to be free today, if we are going to be free today in this world's context, we cannot forget our agency, that we are the ones who have to push the politicians, push these global elites in the direction that if we really want freedom. But freedom is not going to come from the top down, as he's suggesting. It's going to come from the bottom up. And we are waiting on Miss Mia Motley. We're waiting on Andrew Holness. We're waiting on a democratic leader to free us, right? And that is not going to happen. We're waiting on another Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. That's not going to happen. We are the ones who have to free ourselves, and then we can push our leaders in that direction and ensure that their hands stay there, because they can always be diverted to other things that other than freedom. And Pedro is saying here, you hear Australia or Canada blaming colonization. You cannot compare Australia and Canada to this, what we're doing. I think you know better than our Pedro Gemma, because they've benefited from the whole matter of the slaving and of slave labor. So we can't compare Canada and the Caribbean territories to these countries that have benefited. Okay, it's a reason why Sir Hilary Beckles kicking down the ladder he climbed up with. That's a point you're raising here. Once we have climbed up the ladder and we reach at a certain pinnacle, we kick the ladder away. that others will not be able to climb up. That's a beautiful point you're raising here, President Jamal, right? That many of us, once we get at that pinnacle, we don't want other brothers and sisters to get there. And they do that at the University of the West Indies. That's a very known practice at the University of the West Indies. Once they have reached the pinnacle of, being a professor or whatever they are there, then they don't want others. I've heard some very dark stories of, they don't want to graduate that person, even the person qualifies for the PhD. They don't want to give that person because that person might be a competitor to him or to her. I mean, the Caribbean is a big slave environment. It's a plantation. And the University of the West Indies is one. Right? The University of the West Indies is a big plantation and has been for a long time. It's not there to actually free the people and their minds, to liberate them from mental slavery. It's not. It's when you get there in terms of economic and academic success in the eyes of the world, not necessarily in the eyes of freedom people, but in the eyes of the world, when you get there, then you don't want others to join you and to be beside you. You must control power. You must control closeness to so-called white people. So that is how they behave. The group think. Absolutely. The group thinking is the norm. The group thinking is the norm. And that is why he said. So let's end our thing now. And I'm sharing one clip more and we can, I know it's Friday and you want to go and party and do your stuff. So let's listen to another clip. And of a person just saying here that, these people don't control the climate, do they? They don't control the climate. Well, they don't even have control over what comes
about several things that impact the climate. One, Jesus is the creator of all things. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Two, the world continues by his power, who, being the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person, and upholding all things by the power of his word. Three, the world will always have seasons. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. So God will ensure that the climate is suitable to sustain human and animal life. Well, until he decides that he won't. Then the climate will change, suddenly and forever. The elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. For now, know that God maintains the climate, but spend the days that he protects it, knowing that the time is coming when he will end the climate, and we will all stand before him at the judgment.
Okay, so we don't control anything. They don't control anything. They're pretending as if they control everything, right? But what we can do what we can control, yes, and we should protect our environment. But is Miss Miyamoto talking about the wars? Is she talking about the wars that the West is waging against other people? Is she also talking about the fact that the IMF and the World Bank has impoverished people so that they can't build things? Look at Haiti, for example. The Haitians had to be eating dirt, mud. They were making mud cakes, right? It was recently, was it 2011-12? We were hearing that, right? Now, when they have to cut down the trees also because, they don't have money to buy things to cook and all of that, and they're also, according to them, they're destroying the environment because they are needed. They're needed. Right? So the fact of the matter is that if they allow people to live in a very decent condition, which we can, the entire world's population can live decently. Do you know that? Nobody has to be poor. But some people believe that they should have obscene wealth, and that obscene wealth has destroyed people. And then they're telling us now that it's climate change. That's a lie. That's a lie. Another thing is that what we're seeing too, and it's sad, it's very sad. The elites, particularly white elites, they are still, their consciences are still bothering them about slavery. And W.E. Du Bois did say that. He says that slavery is going to be, he says it's going to be a stain that cannot be erased on the American soil and on her psyche. And what they're doing now, they don't want to deal with the root causes of slavery. And what they did, They want to now shift the blame away from their evil and wicked intentions and agenda to the climate. Oh, the climate now is the reason why slavery happened. The climate is the reason why we should have reparatory justice. That's what they're saying right now. Okay, so everything now is going to be blamed on climate change. Vaccines will be blamed on climate change. Pandemics will be blamed on climate change. Poverty will be blamed on climate change. Violence, crime and violence will be blamed on climate change. Illegal trafficking of drugs and arms will be blamed on climate change. And because people are scared, we're going to believe them. So you choose your sides. I think you need to choose what side you are going to be on. Are you going to be on the side of truth by suggesting that climate change is an alarmist? It's an alarmist agenda, right? Does the climate change? Yes, but it has always changed, right? Are we in control of the climate? No, we are not. We can't even go to the sun. They're trying to go to the sun, but they can't. The sun is a fire. So we are not in control of life form, because the sun is the ultimate source of life form on our earth, on our planet. And they can't control, they can't go there, right? They can't go there. But they're pretending as if they're gods, and you believe them. Oh yes, we have to protect our climate. And let me tell you something. If there are several earthquakes tomorrow and hurricanes, you're going to believe them. And they have the power to do that. They have the power to do that, right? And then you're going to believe them, and then you're going to wind up following their solutions, just like the pandemic, and you're going to be destroyed. Okay? So you keep on playing with these people and think that their agenda is your agenda, because it is not your agenda. It is their agenda, and to destroy every person if they can on this planet. Now we have crabs in a barrel mentality, right? It is. And people are just there moving around as if they're living in normal times, and they're waiting for their reparatory justice to begin their business and to party. Black people are funny, aren't we? They control weather, which people think it's climate. Right, correct. Very well said. I like this, what he has said here, Pedro Debot. They control weather, which people think it's climate. Because there's a difference. Beautifully said. Love it. Love the way you put it. Yeah. So we thank you, people. I thank your participation. It's sad that the algorithm is keeping down the people from coming online, not sending the notification, but we can't control that now. We can only do what we can do, and hopefully when it decides to do that, then we will have our message sent to the entire world. Thank you so much for joining, and I'll see you tomorrow in another live session. All the best to you. Ciao.